Hello everyone, this is part 7 of What If Naruto Had the Ninetails and the Shinigami sealed inside him, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Ginrei walked toward the blonde-haired stealth force Shinigami, with two bright pink swords in the old Kuchiki's hands. Minato mustered up the strength to grab his sword with both of his hands and getting in a strong defensive stance, waiting for Ginrei to come closer. Minato continued to look at the gash made by the Rasengan that Ginrei had on his ribs. If he kept him moving, that wound would get worse and he wouldn't be able to continue. Ginrei then flash-stepped towards Minato and attempted to slash him insanely. Minato had little time to dodge all of them and got SCRD on the leg and hands. Minato slashed at Ginrei in an upward fashion. Seeing a wide-open spot the split-second, Ginrei attempted to cut him in half. Minato then flash-stepped and appeared right beside him but with his foot beside his head. Minato kicked with all his might at the old man's temple, then spun around and dashed toward Ginrei. "Come on Minato, let your Ryatsu explode," a voice said to Minato, which freaked him out a bit, but once he came close to Ginrei his Ryatsu skyrocketed to that of a captain's level, possibly farther. His Ryatsu was gold and raging throughout the prism. The two clashed blades and the pink blades dispersed into petals. Ginrei was utterly shocked. No one has gotten close to shattering any of these swords, let alone going toe-to-toe with him. Minato grinned as he looked at his adversary's shocked face as the two drifted back to the opposite sides and looked at each other, Minato's golden aura gracefully waving around him. How did you get your Ryatsu so high?" Ginrei said in shock. "Don't ask me, I don't even know," Minato said, grinning while placing his hand behind his head, which made Ginrei scoff at the boy's attitude in a fight such as this. Ginrei lifted his hand as two more pink swords came into each hand. He also made one of the pink swords attempt to S at Minato. The Shinigami realized he would do that and spun around quickly and harshly slashing at the sword, making it turn to petals. Ginrei then made the petals attempt to dart at him, and at the position the petals and Minato was in he couldn't dodge it or else he'll be in a defenseless pose. Minato got scratched up badly and he fell back. Ginrei attempted to flash step and S him through the stomach, but Minato sensed his movements and spun around, getting his back SCRD as he attempted to S at Ginrei's wound. Ginrei S-ed one of his swords down, blocking the other Zanpakuto. He then kicked Minato back and formed the swords behind him into a solid-like wall. Ginrei S-ed his swords through Minato's hands and into the wall. Minato screamed as the crimson substance began to pour out from his hands. Ginrei grinned and began to silently chuckle as he grabbed another sword and S-ed it through Minato's stomach. Ginrei grabbed another and S-ed it through his ribs, then his feet, thighs, shoulder blades, until he was painfully pinned to the wall where every movement he would make he would feel intense pain. "You feel it, don't you? The anger welling up inside you each time he LS you with those accursed swords." "What?" Minato said within his consciousness. "Lash out at him, give him everything you got, let your anger fuel you and do away with this has-been of a captain." Minato didn't want to do it, but at the same time he did, since each time he got S-ed the pain transformed into anger. The more he got S-ed, that voice became louder. It became so loud that it couldn't be ignored and Minato's golden aura shot out from each of his pores, it seemed. All the swords turned to petals. Minato grabbed his Zanpakuto and the two clashed blades. The pink sword exploded into petals which couldn't even touch Minato with his Ryatsu being so thick it seemed. Ginrei had another pink sword come to his hand and he began to parry his attacks, but it seemed futile since that sword exploded into petals too. Each time he grabbed another pink sword it exploded into petals after 3 or so shots. Now for the finishing blow. Minato yelled as he flash-stepped so fast a medium-sized crater was left where he was standing. In an instant Ginrei was S-ed straight through the lungs and piercing the heart, making the sword come out of Ginrei's back. Once he was S-ed, the rest of the sword S immediately exploded into pink petals that gracefully began to fall around the area like snowflakes. Ginrei dropped his Zanpakuto as his lungs began to slowly fill with blood as it also de-sped from his mouth. Minato's Ryatsu then began to lower as he pulled the sword out and looked at the Kuchiki fell back. Orochimaru looked up as the petals began to fall. He then looked beside him and saw Byakuya chase after his falling grandparent. Grandpa! Byakuya called out, running over to him as fast as he could. He immediately knelt down and held onto his hand, tears starting to well up. Byakuya, you were like a son to me, and though I cannot train you anymore, please, take my sword. It was passed on by all Kuchikis. It's your turn to have it now, my boy. Ginrei said, coughing up blood, then eventually laying his head back and relieving himself of his pain. Byakuya then began to shoot out in tears, screaming his head off, hoping this was just a dream that his grandpa didn't really Byakuya then began to silence himself as he crawled over to his grandfather's sword and looked at his reflection in the blade. Come on Orochimaru, we should go. Minato said, turning around and walking off, trying to ignore the little kid's sadness. The trip back to the second division was silent. Minato didn't say a word as he looked down. Orochimaru looked at him, and then looked back towards the cliff. The two continued to walk, but then split up as Minato walked over to the 4th division to get healed. All the Shinigami knew about Minato and Ginrei's fight, and they knew it would come sooner or later. Minato was still quiet, ignoring all questions unless they were yes or no, so he could just nod or shake his head. Eventually they stopped asking him questions since they knew he wasn't going to answer by now. Minato then went to his room in the 2nd division. He and Orochimaru share the same room together. It was night time when Minato arrived at his room. He saw Orochimaru sleeping, and he decided to lie on the bed and put his hands behind his head and looked at the ceiling. Congratulations Minato, you fought well. Look, who are you? And why do you keep talking to me? Minato said within his consciousness. Isn't it obvious? I am Harashin, the spirit of your Zanpakuto. My name means flying thunder god if you didn't know already. Oh, so why talk to me now? I mean, I've had you since I became a stealth fighter. You could have just helped me get to Shikai instead of me exhausting my powers to defeat really hard enemies. Yes, I know that, but I have my reasons which if I tell you will just turn it around against me. Bottom line is that I'm here now and that's what matters. I suppose. Listen Minato, there will be stronger enemies in your future, that I assure you. You must prepare for battle, and in order to do that, we must get you to Shikai. Awesome, we should start training tomorrow so I can finally get one step closer to Bon Kai, and maybe even further if anyone's ever gotten past Bon Kai, which is probably impossible. I mean. Stop babbling. Damn boy, I didn't stop to listen to you go on and on about Fing Bon Kai. Now, back to business. I would suggest you get some sleep because tomorrow you will be training with me. Gotcha. Minato then stopped talking to Harashin in his mind and then fell asleep. The next month Minato had been isolated from the Soul Society as he had been in his room in a meditation stance. He was deep in his consciousness training with his Zanpakuto spirit. There were plenty other ways to gain Shikai than this, but Minato thought it would be interesting. Once Minato had finally gotten his Shikai, he told no one. A week later he and Orochimaru got assigned to a mission to stop a mini fleet of Quincy to try and flank the Soul Society and take it over. Each squad got the north, west, south, or east. Minato, Orochimaru and 3 other stealth fighters got the east side. They then began to quickly run to the area. Once they got there they started to wait. Minato had never fought a Quincy, so his Shikai might be provoked depending on who he started fighting with. He saw the Quincy began to run up towards their designated area. Once they got to a certain spot, Orochimaru SD1 in half with his Zanpakuto, but was struck in the shoulder blade by a spiritual arrow. Minato started to charge, but then he looked at a certain Quincy. This Quincy had short red hair and a pretty good figure. Minato was awestruck when he saw her and almost ignored the arrow heading toward him. Minato swatted the arrow away, leaving a bit of a burnt mark on the blade oddly. Minato flash stepped up towards a Quincy and diagonally slashed at him, then spun around and thrusted a Rasengan in one of the other Quincy's chest. He had also perfected the first stage of the Rasengan. It was now more powerful when he used it. The Rasengan sent the Quincy flying toward another one as the two slammed into a tree, one S and one not. Minato saw a Quincy with long black hair, jumped in front of the red-haired Quincy and fired 4 spiritual arrows directly at Minato. The Shinigami flash stepped and attempted to S at the Quincy, but he sweep-kicked him and kicked him upward. Minato then stood on a tree limb and looked down. That Shinigami is fast, a Quincy said. Faster than most I've seen. His name would be better associated as the Yellow Flash, whatever his name is though. The black-haired Quincy said. Minato liked the name the Quincy gave him and he grinned, but that didn't ignore the matter that Soul Reapers and Quincy's were enemies. More spiritual arrows fired out at Minato as he flash-stepped around the Quincy's and then attempted to S at the man again. The Quincy's bow then had mini blades come out of the outer curve of the bow and they clashed blades, sorta. Minato grinned, impressed by the Quincy since not a lot of them have a bow like that. Say, what is your name, Quincy? Minato asked. Soken Ishida, and yours, Yellow Flash. Soken said since he didn't know his name. Minato Namikaze, he said, putting more force, which made the Quincy step back, but instead of stepping back the Quincy leaped backwards and shot more arrows at Minato, who easily dodged them. The two looked at each other, as the female Quincy was caught looking over at Minato. The Shinigami and Quincy then leaped toward each other and clashed blades. The Quincy fired at spiritual arrow which hit Minato straight in the stomach. Damn, shoulda thought that he could do that, gotta be more careful, these Quincy's are a mystery to me. Minato said as he stood back up, his stomach starting to slowly have blood come from the wound. Minato and Soken began to clash once more, Soken beginning to easily overpower Minato for reasons the Shinigami didn't know at the time. Soken rapidly fired spiritual arrows as Minato flash-stepped away from each one. Every time he got close those blades would come out of the bow and inch farther so that Minato couldn't get within striking distance. The pattern continued just as Minato wanted. When he went up to try and strike him again he voluntarily got LD by the spikes, which made Soken surprised. Minato then S-ed Soken in the stomach and twisted the blade farther in. The spikes then turned a bright blue just like the spirit arrows, and the spikes shot out of the bow. Blood came out of Minato's left shoulder, it shoot out like a hose as he fell back, spinning a sleeve off to quickly bandage it as Soken got closer. Minato. Orochimaru called out his injury still hurting him, but he slowly got up and grabbed his Zanpakuto. Soken made another spirit arrow and aimed it to Minato, who was lying on the ground in pain. Once Soken shot the arrow it was immediately deflected as Orochimaru appeared in front of his fallen comrade. Orochimaru's sword then glowed purple as he swinged his sword out at Soken. A wave of Ryatsu followed the slash and attempted to hit him. Soken lifted his hand up as a barrier of Ryatsu rose and collided with the purple Ryatsu, which cancelled each other out. You can control Ryatsu? Orochimaru asked in shock since he too knew little of the Quincy's. We Quincy's have contact with spiritual pressure just like you Shinigami do, how do you think we form our arrows? Soken asked as he fired 5 arrows out at Orochimaru. Which must mean it drains his energy each time he makes an arrow, this won't be that hard of a fight after all. Orochimaru thought as he started to dodge the arrows. Orochimaru jumped up and clashed with Soken. Sparks flew as Orochimaru's Ryatsu rose and cracked the bow a bit. He then spun around and sent another purple wave of Ryatsu out at Soken. This time Soken was in a position where he couldn't dodge, so instead of dodging he sent the rest of his spikes on his bow out at Orochimaru. Those spikes were connected to a cable from the bow and they LD Orochimaru and sent him hanging from a tree. The Ryatsu wave was intense and Soken took a lot of damage from it, but the cable remained unharmed. Soken channeled his Ryatsu through the cable which hit Orochimaru directly just like a taser. Orochimaru yelled in pain as the Ryatsu shot into his body. It was like Orochimaru's attack but worse, it was in the inside coming out. His stomach, shoulder, legs and arms shot out from the pressure of the Ryatsu building in his body. Blood was everywhere but Orochimaru slowly grabbed the cables and yanked them out of his body. Orochimaru fell but then Flash stepped away, the whole area was silenced. He left without taking his comrade, such dishonor. Soken said as he walked toward Minato, who was unconscious at the time. Little did Soken know there was a paper note right in front of Minato. Orochimaru had placed a barrier around Minato before he got into the fight. Just as Orochimaru planned, Soken stepped on the note and a huge burst of Ryatsu shot out of the paper and hit Soken directly. Minato was unharmed because of the barrier. Blood shot out as the Ryatsu hit him, but some of the Ryatsu was pulled back and spiraling around Orochimaru's sword as the Shinigami rushed towards Soken and slashed at him diagonally. Soken had burned marks all over his chest and part of his face, his clothes were sped and were covered in blood. His bow was no heavily cracked and if he shot another arrow out of it would break. Soken staggered then looked at his glove, which had been partially damaged. Seems like, I have no choice but to give it my all. Soken muttered after puking up some blood. Orochimaru landed on a tree limb, then looked at Soken reach for his glove. What is he doing? What good will taking off a glove do? The red-headed girl that was with Soken unsealed the barrier and picked the injured Shinigami up and took him away to heal him. She didn't know why she wanted to do that, seeing that he is a Shinigami and Quincy's hate them for ruining their clan, but she felt like she had to. There was something about this Shinigami that made her smile. She took him towards an abandoned hut that was a previous lookout camp for the Quincy's before they attacked. She then began to heal him. This glove, when taken off, lets me go all out, a new form. Are you ready for it, Shinigami? Soken yelled and took the glove off as his Ryatsu skyrocketed and his bow became new again. Orochimaru looked around him and saw the trees, plants, and even some small animals either out or get weaker. Orochimaru twitched as he sensed Soken's Ryatsu continue to rise as the pressure effect began to come in. He's gathering energy from the spirit particles around them. Captain Swaffon told me about this. Orochimaru said to himself as he clapped his hands together, then said, Bakudo 30 Sosu Sansen. Orochimaru chanted as 3 beams of light charged at Soken and try and pin him down. Fool, your binding spells won't work now. Soken shouted as a huge spiritual arrow was shot from his bow that was now wider and longer with saw-like spikes on the outer edge. The bow incinerated the 3 pillars of light. The whole area was now covered in dirt, raising in the air. Minato groaned as he slowly rolled over and began to get up. He opened his eyes and saw the red-haired girl sitting right beside him. He was startled and he scooched back, looking for his Zanpakuto. Don't worry, I didn't bring you here to KU Shinigami. The girl said sweetly as she handed him some food, then said, I partially healed you of your wounds, here have something to eat. Minato took the plate of food and began to eat slowly, then he asked, Who are you, and why are you, a Quincy, helping me, a Shinigami? I am Kushina Uzumaki, and you are? She asked. Minato finished most of the food, then wiped his mouth and said, I'm Minato Namikaze, but you still haven't answered why you helped me. He asked. I helped you because, well, I don't know exactly, I just felt like I should. Kushina said, blushing a bit. He just destroyed my kiddo spell, with one blast, and previously his arrows were considerably weak, Orochimaru said to himself as he jumped down and landed in front of him. Soken fired another large arrow out at Orochimaru. The force was insane. The Shinigami jumped high into the air as he saw the arrow explode into thousands of mini arrows shooting towards Orochimaru. The arrows rapidly shot towards Orochimaru as he made a wave of purple Ryatsu to destroy most. The arrow sped at his stealth force tunic and made him slam into the ground after a few more hit him. Soken appeared in front of him and attempted to slash at his chest once he got up. Orochimaru ducked down, having some of his hair get cut. He then slashed at the Quincy's stomach, making a medium-sized gash. Soken slammed the bladed part of his bow into Orochimaru's wrist. The Shinigami then jumped up and side-kicked him back, then spun his sword around and had the purple wave of Ryatsu spiral around his sword. Orochimaru flash-stepped towards Soken and slashed at him, the bow protecting most of the wave. An arrow was fired and destroyed the purple wave. Soken spun around and upward slashed Orochimaru, making blood fly everywhere. Orochimaru was then grabbed by the ankle and thrown up into the canopy of the tall trees surrounding the Soul Society. Soken immediately appeared in front of Orochimaru and kneed him in the gut, then rapidly punched him. After he was done punching him, he slammed his face in the tree hard enough to make the bark of that area fly off. You didn't think shooting arrows was all that we could do, did you? Soken said, grinning. You're underestimating our abilities, Quincy, Orochimaru said as he clapped his hands, secretly doing a binding spell. Orochimaru coughed up some blood but managed to say this, Carriage of Thunder. Bridge of a spinning wheel. With light, divide this into 6. After he chanted that 6 thin, but wide beams of light struck at Soken hard and pinned him into a tree, making his bow fall all the way to the ground. Orochimaru slowly got up and looked over at Soken and jumped over to the tree he was pinned to. Orochimaru espered at the Quincy multiple times, then made a medium-sized purple aura wave slash at the man's stomach, making it really burnt. Orochimaru then grabbed him by the collar as the binding spell wore off. He dropped him down to the ground, hearing the thud of him landing. Orochimaru grabbed his Zanpakuto, then dropped down a few levels of the tree and laid on a tree limb, panting. You should go, the battle is wearing down, and you might get ked if you're seen with me. Kushina said as You're right, will I ever see you again? Minato asked. Of course, if you want we can talk here at the same place, tonight maybe. Kushina asked as Minato nodded and grinned as the two went their separate ways. Minato saw Orochimaru injured and laying on a tree limb. He looked up at him and asked with a bit of humor in his voice, "Hey, did the little Quincy hurt you?" Minato then started to chuckle a bit. "Like you're one to talk, at least I cared the man, you got your shoulder injured, Orochimaru said, saying the last part quietly. He then looked at Minato and saw his shoulder stat up. He slowly landed on the ground and limped up to him. "Hey, you're healed, how did that happen?" Minato paused a bit then said, "A Shinigami in the 4th squad found me and dragged me off to a safe place, then healed me." He was glad that Orochimaru believed him. They looked around and saw that their area had been cleared and they went back to the Soul Society after scanning around. "It seems like all those Quincy are S," Orochimaru said after getting healed as he and Minato were walking to the 2nd division. "Ya, looks like we really cleaned house, or so they say," Minato said, grinning. The two went back to the 2nd division. Each night Minato snuck out of the Soul Society and into the forest where he talked to Kushina. The two got along really quick and eventually they began to date. No one knew about the two's relationship and for a year that's how it was supposed to be. They would even train with each other as they became stronger. One night a Shinigami from another division was scouting the forest area when he saw Minato and Kushina talking. Instead of doing what most Shinigami would have done and attack the Quincy, this Shinigami decided to go back to his captain, which happened to be Suafon, and tell what he had witnessed. Later the night Suafon walked up to the forest and saw Kushina and Minato talk and eventually kiss. Suafon drew the line there as she threw a dart between Minato and Kushina. Run Kushina! Minato shouted as Kushina disappeared. "Minato, why have you been communicating with that Quincy, and what the hell are you kissing that bee for?" Suafon said with a hint of jealousy in her voice. Well, I can explain," Minato said, unable to think of an excuse. "Such a disgrace, Minato. You were my best stealth force fighter, I thought you would know better than to have your little love with an enemy." Suafon shouted then said, "I hereby banish you from the Soul Society. Now leave. May I do something before I go?" "It has nothing to do with the Quincy, I swear," Minato said. "Fine, I want you out of here by dawn. If I see you and that Quincy communicate again I will have you executed." Suafon said, already having the Quincy's aura out Ofriatsu and Minato's recognized. Minato went over to a cliffside far away from the Soul Society. He unsheathed his sword. He looked at it and saw that it was pretty banged up since he hasn't been taking too good of care for it lately. "I won't be needing this anymore," Minato said grimly as he espered his sword in the ground. He absorbed some of the spiritual power in the sword and formed it into a kunai with 2 prongs and something like a seal wrapped around the handle. "Maybe someone will find this sword. I'll leave this as a reminder of my time spent here in the Soul Society," Minato said as he walked off and made a portal-like thing leaving the Soul Society for good, while making his Ryatsu be insensible to people from the Soul Society so they cannot track him down. Orochimaru had found out about Minato and Kushina's love interest from day one, but since he and Minato were such good friends he didn't rat him out. Instead Orochimaru carefully went to a Quincy village where Kushina was and followed her aura. He arrived in her room where she was in tears from Minato's banishment. Before Minato left for good he told Orochimaru where he was going and if he wanted to follow he could. Orochimaru told Kushina he was heading for a place called Konoha. Kushina thanked him as Orochimaru quickly departed. It had been a few weeks after that when Orochimaru went out to the cliffside to find Minato's sword. Over the weeks Orochimaru changed a lot but not for the best. He took Minato's Zanpakuto out of the ground and sheathed it, then looked out into the horizon. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.